All right, hello everybody. Looking at chapter 9, the nervous system, the spinal cord and spinal nerves today. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail with this just because of the nature of the material and what I think that you should be responsible for. You will need to know the divisions of the nervous system as well as the structure, and in terms of neurons and neuroglia and how the nervous system works, and the anatomy of neurons and the nerves themselves. But in terms of how a cell or a neuron has the propagation of a nerve impulse, I'm not having you be responsible for that. So let's get started. Some of the key terms and some of the outcomes. So when we look at this, we'll of course know the outline of the organization of the nervous system according to structure and function. You'll be able to describe the structure of a neuron, explain the construction and function of the myelin sheath, describe how neuron fibers are built into a nerve, and you'll also list the 4 types of neuroglia in the central nervous system and their functions. We will not be responsible, I'll be not holding you responsible for the steps in an action potential or how neurotransmitters in an impulse transmit that into a synapse. Okay. So let's look at the rest of this. I'm not having you know about the spinal nerves nor some of the reflex arc. The rest of the chapter is being omitted. Okay, so the nervous system itself controls and coordinates all of the body's systems. It detects and responds to stimuli. It contains the brain, the spinal cord, and it acts as switching centers, and it carries messages to and from the central nervous system. So the nervous system itself is broken down into 2 parts: the central nervous system, which consists of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which consists of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. If we look at the overview of the anatomic divisions of the nervous system, you will see that there are 2 sections, the peripheral as well as the central nervous system. The central nervous system makes up the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system consists of all of the branches that are coming off of the spinal cord, and those are the cranial nerves as well as the spinal nerves. So when we look at the peripheral nervous system, which are the cranial nerves and then the nerves coming off of the spinal cord, those are broken down into 2 divisions, the somatic and the autonomic. Somatic, think of body cells, so those are voluntary and those are affecting the skeletal muscles. And the other division of the peripheral nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. That's the ones that we don't have to think about. They're involuntary. They affect all the smooth muscle that line our organs, cardiac muscle like our heart, and our glands. So these are just checkpoints that you can go back over and which we just discussed. So which division of the nervous system exclusively controls skeletal muscles? So of course that would be the somatic, right? Somatic means body cells. And then when we look at a neuron, we're going to describe the structure of it and explain its function in terms of the myelin sheath, and then how the neuron fibers are built and assembled into a nerve. So a neuron itself is the functional cell of the nervous system. They're highly specialized with unique structures. They have a cell cell body, which is really like the cell itself, that has the nucleus and all of the other organelles like the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, all of those kinds of organelles that you would expect in any ordinary cell. And then it also has these cell fibers that are coming off of the cell body. So there are two different fibers. There's one that's above the cell body, and then there's one that is in the other direction. And the dendrites are some of those fibers that bring messages into the cell body. And then on the opposing side of the cell body, you have axons that are carrying those impulses away. So here is a diagram of a motor neuron, and as you can see, there are these little branching like trees, and those are the dendrites. This is the cell body here. This is the nucleus, and then you have a lot of organelles that are represented within that cell body. Then coming off of the cell body in the opposing direction from the dendrites, which are on the one side, is the axon, and the axon can be branching. There are actually several different types of neurons. There are these things called unipolar and bipolar, but of course I'm not going to have you know all of those. This is just the basic structure of a motor neuron, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, and it is voluntary, so it's part of the somatic nervous system. And how do I know that? It's because here, the axons are connecting here down with the muscle. So you have that interaction there. Okay. This is a microscopic view of a neuron, and if you just take a minute and note, this is the nucleus, this is the nucleolus. And then you have an axon on one side, and then over here, these are the branching tree-like structures called the dendrites. And all of the neurons in the peripheral nervous system are sheathed in a protective covering known as the myelin sheath, and it's made out of fat. And that is actually wrapped, the neuron itself is wrapped in these cells that are called Schwann cells, and that it forms the outermost membrane of the neuron in the peripheral nervous system. So if we want to look here, this is one neuron here, the yellow, with the axon, and then we have this coating that goes around the outside, and see, it's wrapped around and around, and this is the neuron here. This wrapping or encasement is called a Schwann cell membrane, and it protects this axon. And if we note, there are sections in here where it is not continuous. Those are called nodes, and it helps in the transmission of a nerve impulse, so that it can jump from one place to the next, and the propagation of that impulse is much faster than having to travel all the way down. So it just makes for a very quick stimulus. And so we have a covering over that membrane, and it's called the neurolemma. You can think of that as like the plasma membrane. So the plasma membrane for a nerve cell in the peripheral nervous system is the neurolemma. And then the axon itself is covered in these Schwann cells. The outside has that neurolemma on it. And that is fatty tissue, and we call that a myelin sheath, and that's what creates the white matter. We also, just to kind of backtrack there, we also have in our central nervous system, so in our brain and our spinal cord, we have a myelin sheath as well, which makes up the white matter, and that is formed from these cells called oligodendrocytes. So what makes up the white matter are myelinated sheaths, and if it's in the central nervous system, they're formed from oligodendrocytes, which are like extra cellular material outside of the neuron, and then the axons themselves are covered in those Schwann cells, which have the neurolemma as the plasma membrane around it, and that makes the white matter. The gray matter is unmyelinated, so we don't have all of these Schwann cells and all this fatty protection there. So that's our gray matter. Okay, so we have a couple of different types of neurons, and in terms of function, we have 3 different types. We have the sensory. The sensory ones are the things that pick up the impulses and carry it to our brain. So it would be like light coming in through our eyes and going to the optic nerve, which goes to the brain. And so that is conducted through the spinal cord and eventually meets with the brain. That sensory neuron is called an afferent neuron. And then the ones that are carrying motor impulses, which go from tell us from the brain, tell our muscles, which are, motor driven, to do something. Those are efferent. So they carry impulses from our central nervous system, from our brain to our muscles and glands. And then there are connections in between, and these are called interneurons, and they relay the information from place to place, but they're only found in the central nervous system. So they are like connectors between some of those sensory afferent neurons. Now, in terms of the difference between nerves and tracts, nerves are fiber bundles that are found in the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system, again, as you recall, are the motor neurons, the somatic ones. A tract is a bundle of nerve fibers that are within the central nervous system itself, and which includes the brain and the spinal cord. The way that all of these nerves are bundled is just like what we saw with the muscles. They are bundled into these little components known as fascicles, and they have connective tissue layers that surround them, just like what we saw with the muscle fascicles, but they're given a different suffix based upon the fact that they are part of the nervous tissue. So that which is lining the nerve fiber itself is called the endoneurium. That which is bundling a bunch of fascicles together is called a perineurium. Then when you have a bundle of fascicles, and that is being encased by the epineurium. So let's look at this. So here again, just like what we saw with a muscle, we have going from the outermost portion, we have the epineurium, okay? And then we have a bunch of fascicles that have the nerve fibers all within it. Surrounding all of these fascicles is the perineurium around it. And then around each one of the fibers is the endoneurium. So the endoneurium, perineurium, and the epineurium. And you can think of it like a bundling of a bunch of pencils. So if each one of these nerve fibers is surrounded by a tissue, and that tissue is known as the endoneurium. Then we take a bundle of those individual pencils that are all surrounded by a sheath, and we bundle those up. That's the peroneurium. Then we take a bunch of those that are all bundled up and we put them together, and that is called the epineurium. Okay, so these are some of the checkpoints again that we've just concluded. And so just a pop quiz: which fibers conduct impulses away from the cell body? So away from the cell body would be axons. And then the neuroglia. There are 4 different types of neuroglia cells. These are in addition to the neuron. These are extra kinds of nervous tissue. And as I said, there are 4 different types, and they serve several different functions. So when we look at these, we have those that are protecting and supporting and nourishing our nervous tissue. This is the only tissue that can regenerate. So if you have nerve damage in the peripheral nervous system itself, you can regenerate some of that nervous tissue if it had some of these neuroglial cells there, and they are there, but the regeneration is very, 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 very slow. So it would take months to years to have that regeneration occur. So the functions are fourfold. They protect, support, and nourish the nervous tissue. They aid in cell repair. They remove any pathogens or impurities like bacteria. And then they also regulate the composition of fluid that might be around the cells. These are examples of them: Schwann cells, which we've already talked about. Joining some of these neurons are astrocytes. Oligodendrocytes are actually found in the white matter of the central nervous system, and they serve as a type of a neuroglial cell as well. So they, as I said, they continue to multiply throughout our life. And then, of course, we have these ependymal cells, which are in the central nervous system. Here are some of those astrocytes, and they are like filler between the neurons. So here is a neuron, there's an astrocyte, and there's a capillary. Okay, just some of the checkpoints. And then, which of the following is not an example of a neuroglial cell? And we know that an astrocyte is, a Schwann cell is, a neuron would not be, because that's not. It's the neuroglial cells are ancillary. They are in addition to the neuron. Okay, how the nervous system works: it is initiated through this action potential. And as I said, I'm not going to have you responsible for the impulse transmission. If you want to look at this, then you're more than welcome to read about it. And there are a number of different types of chemicals that are involved in that. I'm not asking you to know the structure of the spinal cord either, nor some of these spinal nerves. So this concludes the nervous system. Okay, so it's just a general overview of things that you were responsible for, and you're not responsible for any of the disorders either. Okay, so we will move on to chapter 10 after this, and chapter 10 is also dealing with the nervous system. but it looks at the brain and the cranial nerves. Have a nice evening.